The envelope was sitting on the mantelpiece. I noticed it the moment I walked into my grandmother's living room because my grandmother, Vera, had never in her 82 years of life left anything sitting on any surface without a reason. She was the kind of woman who believed that objects in a home should be either useful or intentional, and that anything occupying visible space was therefore making a statement, whether you meant it to or not. The envelope was cream colored, thick. My name was written across the front in Vera's handwriting. The particular careful cursive of a woman who had learned penmanship in an era when it was considered a reflection of character. Nora. Just my name. Nothing else. My half-sister Diane saw me looking at it, and the expression that crossed her face in that moment. Fast, involuntary, impossible to fully conceal. Told me everything I needed to know before a single word of that afternoon had been spoken. She had already seen the envelope. She already knew what was inside it, and she was afraid. My name is Nora Callahan, and I am 31 years old. I have spent most of my life being the person in my family who required explanation. My mother, Claire, was Vera's youngest daughter. She was 23 years old and unmarried when she had me, and the circumstances of my conception were the kind that polite families from certain generations absorbed quietly and discussed minimally and filed under the broad category of things that happened and were now simply the shape of things. My biological father was not in the picture, had never been in the picture. Was a name my mother mentioned once when I was 15 and never again. What was in the picture was Vera. My grandmother had taken one look at the situation. Her youngest daughter, 23, frightened, alone, holding a baby she had not planned for, and made a decision in the particular unhesitating way Vera made all her decisions. She moved Claire and me into the spare bedroom of her house in Asheville, North Carolina, and kept us there for the first 3 years of my life while my mother finished her degree and found her footing and became the woman she was eventually going to be anyway. Those 3 years shaped everything. I grew up knowing Vera's house the way children know places that have them during the years when the world is still being assembled in their minds. The smell of her kitchen in the morning. The sound of her sewing machine from the back room on Saturday afternoons. The particular quality of afternoon light in her living room, where she kept her books arranged by subject along the west wall and her photographs arranged by year along the east wall, and where everything had a place and a reason. Diane was my mother's older sister's daughter, 8 years older than me. Raised in Charlotte with her two parents and her younger brother in a house considerably larger than Vera's, and with considerably less need for the particular closeness that necessity produces. Diane had loved Vera from a distance, the way people love things they consider safely permanent. Holiday visits, birthday calls, the comfortable assumption that grandmothers endure. I had loved Vera from inside her house. That difference mattered. It mattered in the way Diane had always understood it mattered, even if she had never said so directly. There was a particular quality to the way she looked at my relationship with Vera. Not quite jealousy, not quite resentment, something that lived in the complicated space between those two feelings and expressed itself in small, consistent ways over 30 years. The comments about how I had always been Vera's favorite. The suggestions at family gatherings that I was somehow receiving more than my share of attention. The way she described me to extended family members I hadn't met. Claire's girl, the one who basically grew up at Vera's house, with just enough implication in her tone to make the description feel like a judgment rather than a fact. I had absorbed all of it quietly. The way I absorbed most things. Vera had a stroke in February. Not fatal, but significant enough to make certain conversations urgent that had previously been postponable. She came home from the hospital after 2 weeks, and I drove up from Charlotte, where I had been living for 4 years working as a social worker for a family services organization, and spent a month helping her settle back into her routines and assess what kind of ongoing support she would need. During that month, we talked more directly than we ever had. Not about the past exactly. About the present. About what Vera wanted. About the family and its various complications and the particular way certain relationships had developed over decades in directions she had observed carefully and felt strongly about. She talked about Diane. Not cruelly. My grandmother was not a cruel woman, but honestly, in the way she talked about everything. Plainly, without decoration, without apology for the accuracy of her observations. Diane has always believed. Vera said one evening, sitting in her chair by the west window while I sat across from her with tea. That love is a competition. I didn't say anything. She isn't wrong that you and I are close, Vera continued. She is wrong about what that means for everyone else. She looked at me directly. I want you to know some things, she said. Before, I couldn't say them. We talked for 3 evenings. On the 4th evening, Vera asked me to call Howard Mills, her estate attorney in Asheville who had handled her affairs for over 20 years, and make an appointment for her the following week. I made the appointment. I drove her there. I waited in the reception area while she was inside for 90 minutes. When she came out, she looked tired but settled. The particular settledness of someone who has completed something they needed to complete. Done, she said simply. I helped her to the car. She didn't tell me what had been discussed. I didn't ask. Some things are communicated in the doing rather than the explaining. The family reunion was Diane's idea. She organized it for the August following Vera's stroke. A gathering at Vera's house in Asheville of all the extended family, framed as a celebration of Vera's recovery and her 82nd birthday. Tables on the back lawn. Catered food. A photographer Diane had hired, because she believed important occasions required documentation. I understood immediately what the reunion was actually for. Diane was 40 years older than me in the ways that mattered. She had been watching Vera age for years with the particular attention of someone calculating proximity to an ending. The reunion was an opportunity to reassert her position, to be seen as the organizer, the caretaker, the one who had pulled the family together, the one most central to Vera's final chapter. It was a performance of closeness rather than closeness itself. I came because Vera asked me to. Come, Nora, she had said on the phone in July. I want you there. Diane organized it, I said carefully. I know. A pause. I have my reasons. I drove up from Charlotte on a Friday evening and stayed at a small inn 2 miles from Vera's house because Diane had organized the sleeping arrangements and somehow the spare bedroom. The bedroom where my mother and I had lived for 3 years had been assigned to Diane's brother's family. I had said nothing about that. Some things were not worth the conversation. Saturday arrived warm and bright. The back lawn looked beautiful. Diane had genuine organizational ability, whatever else was true about her. Round tables with white cloths, flower arrangements in mason jars, string lights for the evening, and a long buffet table along the side of the house. People arrived in clusters throughout the morning, cousins and aunts and a great uncle I had met perhaps twice in my life, all of them navigating the particular social mathematics of large family gatherings where half the people aren't entirely sure how everyone else is connected. Vera sat in her good chair near the back door, slightly apart from the main activity, receiving visitors the way matriarchs receive visitors, with warmth, with patience, and with the particular serene authority of someone who has nothing left to prove. I stayed close to her for most of the morning. Diane noticed. Of course she noticed. Diane noticed everything that touched her understanding of the family's social geography. Around noon, when the gathering had reached its comfortable midpoint energy, food consumed, drinks refilled, children running across the lawn, older relatives settled into lawn chairs sharing stories. Diane materialized beside me near the buffet table. You're hovering, she said pleasantly. I'm visiting with my grandmother, I said. She needs to spend time with everyone. Diane refilled her glass. Not just you. I looked at her. I'm not preventing anyone from spending time with her, I said carefully. Diane smiled. The particular smile she had perfected over 30 years, the one that looked warm in photographs and felt like something else in person. You know what I mean, Nora. She kept her voice light. You've always had a way of making yourself the center of things with Vera. It's just. Today is for everyone. I said nothing. She's everyone's grandmother, Diane continued. Not just yours. And there it was, the thing she had been building toward. The thing she said at every gathering in one form or another, always lightly, always pleasantly, always with the specific deniability of some ability of someone who could claim they were simply making an observation. Not just yours. I looked at Diane across the buffet table in my grandmother's backyard. Then I smiled.
"You're right," I said. "She's everyone's grandmother." And I walked back to Vera's side. The moment happened at 4 o'clock. The afternoon had settled into its later rhythm. Desserts on the table, the photographer moving through the crowd, children beginning to tire, the older relatives consolidating into smaller groups for quieter conversation. Diane had gathered most of the adult family members near the center of the lawn for what she announced was a toast to Vera. She had a glass of champagne and the particular bright energy of someone about to do something they have been planning. She spoke warmly about Vera, about her strength, her wisdom, her long life in this house in Asheville that had been the center of the family for decades. She spoke about the importance of family gathering together, about the connections that bound everyone present. Then she said something that was not part of a toast. "Vera," Diane said, turning toward my grandmother with her champagne glass raised, "has been so many things to so many of us. A mother, a grandmother, a home base." She paused. "And I think it's important, especially as Vera gets older, that our family, her real family, make sure she is surrounded by the people who have always been there. Real family." The words landed in the particular way words land when they are chosen precisely for the wound they will cause. Several people glanced toward me, because everyone who had been in this family for more than a decade understood the implication. Real family, as opposed to Claire's girl, the one without a father, the one who had grown up in the spare bedroom by necessity rather than by right. I stood very still. Vera had heard. I knew she had heard because I knew Vera's face with the particular intimacy of someone who had watched it across kitchen tables and in hospital waiting rooms and through 31 years of ordinary and extraordinary moments. The slight tightening around her eyes, the infinitesimal shift in her posture. She said nothing. She looked toward the mantelpiece visible through the back door, and I remembered the envelope. Vera spoke before I could think about whether to speak. Not loudly. Vera had never needed volume to command a room. She simply said, "Howard," and Howard Mills, whom I had not noticed until that moment, stepped away from a cluster of guests near the side of the house. I had not known he was there. From the expression on Diane's face, she had not known either. Howard was 67, silver-haired, with the steady, unhurried manner of someone who had spent 4 decades in rooms where important things were being said and had learned to move through them without disturbing the air unnecessarily. He nodded at Vera. "Now?" he asked quietly. "Now," she said. Howard went inside. He came out a moment later carrying the cream-colored envelope from the mantelpiece. The one with my name on it. Diane's expression changed so completely and so fast that several people nearby noticed and turned to look at her rather than at Howard. Howard stood in the center of the gathered family and said, calmly and without preamble, "Vera asked me to be here today because she wanted certain things said in front of everyone. She has written them down because she wanted to be precise." He held up the envelope. "This letter is addressed to Nora, but Vera's instructions are that it be read aloud. To everyone." He opened the envelope. He read. Vera had written 4 paragraphs. The first was about the house. She had updated her estate documents following her stroke. The house in Asheville. The house where she had raised her children and taken in her youngest daughter and her infant granddaughter and built the center of the family's life for 40 years. Was being left in its entirety to me. Not to be sold. To be lived in. To be kept as the family's gathering place for as long as I choose to keep it. The second paragraph was about why. Vera had written, in her precise, careful cursive, translated into Howard's steady reading voice, that she had watched her family carefully for 30 years, that she had noticed who came and who called and who showed up in the ordinary seasons rather than only the significant ones, that she had noticed who sat with her at the kitchen table and who stood at the edge of the party, organizing its appearance rather than contributing to its substance. She had written that she loved all of her grandchildren. She had also written that love and inheritance were not the same thing. That inheritance was the formal recognition of a relationship rather than its proof, and that the relationship she was formally recognizing was the one that had been present, consistent, and real across 3 decades of ordinary life. The third paragraph was brief. It said, Nora grew up in this house. This house already knows her. I am simply making the paperwork agree with the truth. The fourth paragraph was addressed to Diane specifically. Vera had written, Diane, I know this will be difficult. I want you to understand that this decision was not made in reaction to anything you have done. It was made in recognition of something Nora has done. Those are different things. I hope you will find your way to that understanding. I have always loved you. That has never been the question. Howard finished reading. The back lawn was completely silent. Even the children had stopped moving. Diane was standing very still with her champagne glass halfway to a toast that had become something else entirely. Her face was unreadable in the way faces become unreadable when too many things are happening inside them simultaneously. I was looking at Vera. My grandmother was looking back at me with the particular expression she had worn across kitchen tables and hospital waiting rooms for 31 years. The expression that said she had thought everything through and was at peace with all of it. I walked to her chair. I crouched down beside her. Grandma, I said quietly, you didn't have to do it this way? Yes, I did, she said simply. Some things need witnesses. The afternoon continued, not smoothly, not as Diane had planned it, but it continued because life continues through even the moments that rearrange everything, and because there were children present who needed to eat their dessert and older relatives who needed to get home before dark and a photographer who was quietly deciding which of the last 2 hours she was going to pretend she hadn't witnessed. Diane left within the hour. She didn't speak to me before she left. I didn't expect her to. The conversation that needed to happen between us was not a conversation that could happen on the same afternoon as the thing that had just occurred. Some distances need time before they can be crossed. Her brother Marcus, quieter than Diane always had been, shook my hand at the door. She'll come around, he said. I know. I said. She loved Vera too. I know that as well. He nodded. Left. Howard found me near the end of the evening when most guests had gone, and Vera was resting inside, and I was gathering mason jar flower arrangements from the tables. She planned this very carefully, he said. I know. The reunion was Diane's idea, he said. But Vera was the one who suggested August specifically. I looked at him. She wanted everyone present, Howard said. She wanted witnesses. She didn't want there to be any ambiguity afterward about what she intended and why. I thought about Vera saying, now, with the particular calm of someone who had chosen her moment precisely. She knew Diane would say something, I said. Howard almost smiled. She said it was a reliable prediction. I laughed despite everything. The kind of laugh that arrives mixed with tears feels entirely appropriate. I moved into the Asheville house in October. Not immediately. I gave my Charlotte apartment proper notice and completed my client transition at work carefully because the families I worked with deserved that care, regardless of what was happening in my personal life. But in October, I came home. That is the only word that felt right for it. Not moving, not inheriting. Coming home. To the house I had known since infancy. To the kitchen where Vera had taught me to cook, and the west wall where her books still stood arranged by subject, and the spare bedroom where my mother and I had lived during the years when this place had been the whole world. I changed very little about it. The books stayed where they were. The photographs stayed on the east wall. The sewing machine stayed in the back room, even though I didn't know how to use it. I planned to learn. Vera moved into the smaller bedroom on the ground floor because the stairs had become difficult. She was still in the house, still present, still the person who knew where everything was and why. We had dinner together every evening, ordinary dinners. Soup, pasta, or the particular casserole she had been making since my mother was young. We talked about ordinary things and occasionally about significant things, and we sat in comfortable silence when there was nothing particular to say. That was the relationship Howard had read about at the reunion. That was the relationship Vera had put her name on in front of witnesses. Diane called in December, not to argue, simply to talk. Her voice was different, quieter, with the particular quality of someone who has spent several months working through something difficult and has arrived at a place they didn't expect. I want to understand, she said. I'm not calling to fight. I just want to understand. Okay, I said. Why you? She said, not unkindly. Genuinely. I thought about how to answer that honestly without making it a wound. Not why me instead of you, I said. Why me specifically? Because Vera wasn't choosing between us. She was recognizing something. What? Presence, I said. Just showing up. For the ordinary parts. Diane was quiet for a moment. I was building a career, she said. I had my own family. I couldn't just. I know, I said. I'm not criticizing you. Neither was Vera. That's what her letter said. Another silence. She said she loved me. Diane said quietly. She did love you, I said. She talked about you. She was proud of what you built. But love and inheritance aren't the same thing. I paused. She said that herself. Diane exhaled slowly. I'm not sure I'll ever completely understand it, she said. That might be okay, I said. Understanding and accepting aren't always the same thing either. She was quiet again. Then, is she well? Vera? She's good, I said. She corrected my soup recipe last night. Diane laughed. A small sound. Real. That sounds like her. Yes, I said. It does. We talked for another 20 minutes. Not resolved exactly, but begun. The beginning of something that might eventually become workable between two women who love the same woman differently and would have to find their own way to coexist in her wake. Vera would have wanted that. She had said as much in her letter. I intended to try. I am 31 years old, and I live in my grandmother's house in Asheville, North Carolina, and I am home. Every morning, I walk through the rooms the way Vera walks through them. Slowly, with attention, noticing what the light is doing and what needs doing, and what is simply beautiful for its own sake and requires nothing more than to be noticed. The books are on the west wall. The photographs are on the east wall. Vera is in the ground floor bedroom and on the mantelpiece. Empty now of the cream-colored envelope that sat there through the summer. There is a photograph I framed last month, Vera and my mother and me, taken in this living room the summer I was 2 years old, before I was old enough to understand what it meant that this was the house that had caught us when we needed catching. I understand it now. I understand that belonging is not something you are granted by the loudest person in the room or the one with the most confident claim. It is something you build through presence and attention and consistency across the ordinary seasons that nobody photographs or celebrates or considers particularly significant in the moment. Vera knew that. She spent 82 years knowing it, and she made sure at the end that everyone else knew she knew it. Real family, Diane had said. The letter on the mantelpiece had answered that. Real family shows up for the ordinary parts, for the kitchen table evenings and the hospital waiting rooms and the 31 years of unremarkable Tuesday mornings that nobody will remember individually, but that build in accumulation into the kind of relationship that withstands any amount of public challenge. That was what Vera recognized. That was what she named. If you have ever been the person who stayed close when it was inconvenient, who showed up when showing up cost something real. I hope you know that the people who matter most are watching. They see the presence. They remember the ordinary seasons. And sometimes, in the most deliberate and loving way possible, they make sure the record reflects the truth. Quietly. Correctly. In front of everyone who needed to hear it. Thank you for being here with me today. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone who saw you clearly when others looked past you, please share it with someone who might need the reminder.